Welcome to another episode of the Dragon's Den podcast. Today, we are joined by Nick Ledin. Many know Nick for his heavy involvement in things like Firefighter Rescue Survey, being part of committees and advisory boards, and teaching around the nation. All of those things are true, but one of the things I love most about Nick is his unwavering commitment to truth, science, and tracking down the facts to the best of his ability. We did talk about his background, the things he's involved in, but we also took a little detour, discussed things like truth on social media and how to navigate those waters. If I ever do a philosophy podcast, I'm pulling Nick in as my very first guest. That being said, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome to the next episode of the Dragon's Den podcast. Today we have on with us Nick Ledin. Nick first came onto my radar a while back when I actually first kind of met him or knew about him whenever I was kind of dabbling in the search world with Dustin Martinez. I found out that he was teaching a little bit with Nick, so I kind of found him online. And then he really came onto my radar much to a much further capacity when I started to kind of dig into him a little bit. And then turns out he's hosting podcasts, which we'll get into. And more importantly, he was doing a lot of work with the Firefighter Rescue Survey. So at this point, I've said this before on other podcasts. When I look back and I look at the guys that I've had on, I'll say, man, to get Nick on would be really cool. And I wouldn't have thought that would even been possible 16 episodes ago. But I'm so excited to have Nick on because of the amount of the work that Nick has put in has been quite influential to my career and the things that I do and how I operate. So, Nick, the way we always start these things off is a little bit about your background. I'm not going to read through your bio. So started out, number one, welcome in, and number two, let us know how you got into the fire service, a little bit about your background, and then we'll start to travel down the reasonably long list of topics that we have. So welcome in, man.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be in the Dragon's Den. I'm a fan of what you're doing and have been a fan for a little bit now. So I'm just as excited to be on here. So my fire service career, I started back in 2007. I kind of fell backwards into the fire service. I was a EMT and a paramedic prior to this, had finished up paramedic school. I was working as an EMT still, so I wasn't quite a medic. And while I'm going through my 500 hours of clinical times, we have to we break it up in Colorado. I started my career out in Colorado. We break it up into 3 or 4 125-hour sections. So the last one that I did, I worked for a fire department. So they had medics there. I was on the ambulance with their medics, and I would run calls for 12 hours a day and had to do that, 10 and a half times. And I thought, these firefighters got this figured out. They're making more money than I am. Even the medics that I was working with were making. They get to do cooler stuff than the medics that I have. They get a little bit more downtime than the guys that I have. They get to work out every day, and they just seem happier overall. So that was at Fountain Fire Department where I was doing my last 125 hours. And I was working with some great dudes that I'm still friends with, Skeldon and Rhino and Nate and Jim and Willis. So like all really good guys that I still consider friends to this day. And they're like, well, why don't you just come and get your Fire 1 cert? We do all our Fire 1, Fire 2, and wildland stuff in-house. We can just roll right into that. So I literally took my medic test, got certified as a medic, and then a week later started my Fire 1 class. And that Fire 1 class, if memory serves, was a Fire 1, Fire 2, and hazmat awareness class, I think, at the time. And I think we got our S190, S130, and S190 in that as well. So it was 6 months long, 7 months long, a couple nights a week, a handful of weekends a month as well. And so just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then as I was getting ready to graduate with my Fire 1 and Fire 2 and to become a full-on volunteer firefighter, they needed another medic, and they liked the hire in-house, and they didn't have a deep bench of medics there. So I ended up getting hired right away, and started in 2007, late September of 2007, I think. Got hired right away, and I was online and kind of off to the races. I was super comfortable in my role as an EMT and as a medic there. And so for the first year, I just rode an ambulance. And then one day they're like, hey, you got to cross the bay and you got to ride the engine today. And I was literally nervous. Luckily, I had a great crew there, but I was leaning really hard on my crew to make sure I didn't look like a giant idiot. We rode two on our engines at the time, driver and officer. And so now I was driving a fire engine. And luckily, I had guys like Skeldum and Rhino that to made sure that I didn't look like a complete idiot. I still did my fair share of looking like an idiot. Um, but luckily they kind of held put me under their wings, and that turned into that friendship, and that mentorship turned into like this kind of this competition. And especially with Rhino, it was like who could read more, who could study more, who could train more, who could go to more classes, who could try to get more certifications, who could like know something that the other one didn't and come back the next day and then teach that person. And so for the next couple of years, I worked quite a bit with Rhino. Even if we weren't at the same station, we were on the same shifts, and we were bugging each other quite a bit. And he might not have felt it as strongly as I did, but every day I wanted to be a little bit smarter and work a little bit harder and sweat a little bit more than Rhino did. And fast forward a handful of years, and now I was fully invested and involved in the job. And we had our first kid at the time. My wife and I were out in the Colorado Springs area, the Fountain area, and had our first kid. And then we decided to move back towards the Midwest. I grew up in the Minneapolis area, the suburbs of Minneapolis. I went to school down in Iowa, and ended up getting hired in Eau Claire, Wisconsin back in 2013. So I've been here for 12 years now. A couple years ago, got promoted to a captain, and now I'm a captain at the north side on truck 8 right now. And my crew, we ride 3 on our trucks and on our engines here. My crew is super squared away as well. I got Isaac as my driver, who used to be my lieutenant, and then I got Stevie as my backstep, who is one of the best back steps that I could ask for. So I'm super fortunate in my career. So that's kind of my career fire service journey. And then as we'll kind of dive into, I've been super fortunate as well, just in the other domains. I've got to do a little bit of instructing around the area and around the country. I'm involved in firefighter rescue survey. I've got to do some work with FSRI. I do some work with NFPA and help out with a conference or two here and there, and just super thankful and help and do some podcasts, as you already mentioned. Just super engaged and happy to be here in Wisconsin. Happy to be at my department. Happy to be with my family, and then happy to be involved with kind of the larger fire service as well.
God, they got that. I literally developed 3 questions. We have our list of stuff. I developed 3 questions immediately that are not on this list that I'm like, oh crap, I want to ask him about that. I want to ask him about that. Like one of the things is I'm just wondering, that's not one of the topics. You talked about having 3 on a truck. Do y'all have a decent truck culture? Do y'all have like an auto assignment? Like, hey, when you get there, your job is like search, forcible entry, and vent, or is it kind of like we'll see what it is when we get there?
So it's a little bit in between those two extremes. So it's changed a lot from when I first started. And when I say truck, I mean a quint. So we have 500 gallons of water, we have cross lays, we have a little bit of supply hose in the back of our rigs as well. So it's a little bit dependent on where we arrive. If we're first due and we're going to be the first ones there for 30 seconds or so, we're probably grabbing an attack line. If we're second due or third due, especially kind of on our shift, our battalion chiefs are pretty squared away here. We're super fortunate in that respect that they try to put us towards search. We probably are going to lose our driver, and he's going to be outside throwing the stick at least for the first minute to get that in some type of offensive position. Then he's going to try to join up with either us or another crew there. But it's not quite as explicit as it is in other locations, where first due is X, second due is Y. There's a little bit of kind of this nebulousness to us, where we do have the ability to call some audibles here and there. So our truck culture is definitely trending in the right direction. We are getting more and more unified as a department, which is really nice. But we're not quite where we want to be at this point in time. But there's a lot of variables as well. Our city, just like most cities, our city is kind of your average or mean and median city or suburb of America right now, where we have 75,000 people here. We have a mix of industry, a mix of residential, a mix of commercial, and depending on where this fire is, it might kind of change our strategies and tactics slightly. Not necessarily where in the city, to some degree that's the case, but it's more kind of what type of building are we going to, what this occupancy is.
Sure, sure, no doubt. One of the other things that you said, which I think may end up leading another topic, is the fact that you had your early influence. As soon as you got in to the fire service, you had guys around you that were pushing each other. And I've said this on this podcast a bunch of times. It's like I said it. I didn't have a mentor, guys that were pushing me and kind of guiding me in that right direction of let's learn something new, let's read the next thing, or hey, here's the thing I know that you don't know. To I like friend that friendly competition to kind of push. It's so cool that you had it early on. I want to know from you, once again, we did not talk about this, but it's a question that I have. How early on, if you came on sometime in 11, I'm sorry, 07, 08, how early on were you pushing towards outside training and conferences? It's something we talk about all the time on this podcast. And that's something that probably didn't exist a whole lot in 07, 08. Not like it does not like it does today. Now just about everywhere you could, throw a stick and probably hit a conference somewhere. So when did that influence outside training and pushing, reading books that weren't Jones and Bartlett and IFSTA, that kind of stuff? When was that influence really coming into your career?
So I don't know specifically, but for the first year-ish, I was a medic and was more than happy to be a medic that worked for a fire department and wasn't really invested or involved in the fire side. So shortly after a year and I was forced to go on the engine, that's kind of when this started a little bit. But really it picked up. I was fortunate enough that I started my career in Colorado Springs. So relatively early on, I went to a class. Maybe this is '09, I'm going to guess. I went to an irons and ladders forcible entry class. And that kind of blew my mind open. And that was the start of all of this. So I don't quite know the timeline, but that was a really early kind of paradigm shift for me, and the trajectory of my career. It was very kind of flat to start, and then there was a little kind of bit of a bump. And so working with Rhino was a bump. Going to an irons and ladders class brought me to that next plateau as well, and realizing, hey, these guys are like geographically like 5 miles away from me, but they are years ahead of me as far as their knowledge and their understanding of the fire service at large. And I'm like, if these guys can do it, I can at least try to do something along this level. So like Ryan Royal, Nick Chappell, and Brian Lynch were some of the early mentors that I had as well, that they didn't know who I was at all, but I was keeping an eye on them from behind my desk. And we had friends that kind of rolled together as well. Some of our guys had gone on to work for Spring, so we kind of knew some of the same people a little bit. We were a suburb of Colorado Springs, so we bordered Colorado Springs, so we were close geographically. So that was a huge one for me as well. And then I started going to a couple classes. There was two guys, I believe it was two guys at Colorado Springs had this training group where they would bring in instructors. So it wasn't like full on conferences. They'd bring in a guy for a day here and there. So once or twice a year, they were called two knucklehead firemen, and they brought in a handful of people. So I got to go to a couple of those classes as well. So that was kind of before these kind of mini or micro conferences, and I mean that in the best way, kind of
Sure.
popped up everywhere. Uh, we had a couple classes there, and I got to go to like John Sorello. That changed my mind. That was back in like 2011. That's where I first heard about FSRI or UL at the time. So a bunch of these kind of right place, right time, just putting myself out there, meeting the right people, and started getting motivated and involved in this. So it probably started to the long story long is probably like 2009-ish is when I really started kind of digging in and reading as much as I could and reaching out to people as well, like guys in Sweden and guys in Washington State and guys that worked for UL, and tried to ask them questions that I didn't know the answers to, and the guys around me didn't quite know the answers to either. So, and the internet, we're super lucky to be in here in this kind of renaissance of the fire service, I feel like. And people were more often than not, the people that I reached out to were more than happy to answer my dumb questions for me.
Man, that's as far as what you just said, that is so incredibly true. Everybody I seem to reach out to, even where there's a lot of guys I was intimidated to reach out to, guys that I just, you just see a guy, you're so far ahead down this path than I am. It's crazy. The fact that you started kind of digging to outside classes in '09, Like I didn't know that outside classes were even really a thing. Like in other than like a state certification, like hey, you're going to go take this outside class an hour away to get a certain cert, vehicle extrication or rope tech. Basic outside, hey, we're going to teach you how to force some doors. I didn't know that like I just wasn't plugged in enough to know what I was missing. And so anyway, I go to CFT in 2022, so way much later, and you see all these guys, and I remember once again, you reach out to guys like you want to start to implement stuff in your department, and you're like, oh man, I'm fired up. Like I feel like I can make some change. And you reach out to like Eric Wheaton, and you're thinking, man, he's not. I'm thinking in my head when I hit enter, like, oh my God, he's gonna think I'm an idiot. He doesn't have time for me. He's like, who is this dude to ask me these questions? And it was completely the opposite. And then it happened again and again. Eric has been unbelievable. And then every single person that I reach out to, it seems like it's the same damn thing. They just want to try to help and make it better. And I've had that experience with you also, which we'll get into here in a minute. What was the other thing I wanted to ask you? Oh, so from '09 to now, you've been on kind of like I don't want to say you've been on a tear, but like you've been doing a lot of stuff. Did you ever find yourself dipping into like did you ever find like so my thought was I was actually cleaning the oven earlier and I was like, man, I wonder if Nick had some band like everybody's got bandwidth, right? They talk about like when you start taking on all these projects and you're part of a lot of different things, do you ever feel like people put stuff on you, or has it happened in the past where they're like, oh, Nick would be good for this project? And do you just keep saying yes to things, or do you say, you know what, I probably would, but I feel like I'm kind of tapping out a little on my bandwidth side, and I'm gonna say no to this thing. Like I can't take on this project that you're asking me to do. Have you had those moments?
I have, and I probably should say no more than I typically do. I'm involved right now in either we're debating this right now, revising or rewriting maybe a chapter of a textbook, um, which is not something that's super exciting to me. But I feel like the juice is probably worth the squeeze. We're going to hit people right away when they enter the fire service or before they even formally enter the fire service. This is something that I could get better at, and it's something that the wife and I talk about quite a bit. I don't do a ton, but I have a couple podcasts that take up, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 days a year, something like that, or at least parts of those days. Um, I travel a little bit when it comes to instructing and going to conferences, either as a student or as an instructor. I should say no to more, probably. And it gets to the point right now where what I want to do, and I kind of contradicted myself saying because I said yes to a textbook. But when somebody asks me to do something now, if my gut instinct is, oh my God, yes, then I'm in. But if I have to like think about it, it's probably going to be a no. But every once in a while, I don't know if it's boredom, ego, whatever it is, I end up saying probably yes to more than I probably should. So that's something that's kind of a constant struggle, and it's something that my wife is a little bit better at, and sometimes has to remind me, probably has to remind me a little bit more often than I should need reminding.
Yeah, no doubt. My wife is so wonderful, and we're gonna talk about her a little bit later. My wife is so wonderful, but I've only been down this path for not that long. Like the let me go figure out what's out there and all and that kind of deal. So she's been super supportive in everything, but you've been at it for so long that I'd imagine like, ask Molly again in, a decade if she's going to be super supportive of everything that I'm doing. And the answer might be like, he might be doing a little too much. So I can sympathize with your wife that she's probably like, hey, pump the brakes a little bit. I know that for me, my bandwidth is probably not where yours is at. And I've had that situation where guys have come to me and said, hey, can you be a part of this thing? And I've told them, um, like, no, because um, I probably have time for it, but I don't want to hit the burnout phase. And they were like, man, sometimes you just need a push. Like sometimes you just need a push. And it's like, I don't want to be pushed. And I've felt that. I've viscerally felt that and had to turn things down. I was just kind of wondering with all the things that you have going on and are juggling and plates are spinning in the air. I was wondering if you had that same experience. So, from that, those were all not things that we were going to discuss. But from that, let's move to the way that I mostly know you, which is the firefighter rescue survey. So it's not where you first hit the radar. Once again, it was with Dustin Martinez. Was where I saw your name that you were teaching with him, but I hadn't contacted you, hadn't reached out to you. But I know that in 2022, when I went to CFT, Chief Ike was heavily talking about the firefighter rescue survey. And once again, as I kind of followed you online, I saw, where you were bebopping in and out of and teaching and talking that I'd seen you on podcasts before. Firefighter rescue survey it's one of the very first places that I actually bought a sticker to try to support you guys because when I saw it, it was so eye opening and I was so passionate about it. I was like, this is I felt like truly it was revolutionary. The data that we have now that we didn't have before, and the fact that it takes a lot. I'm gonna let you talk more on it, but like the fact that it takes so much to lift, it's such a heavy lift project, and it's free. The things that are hard to do and are free are so rare because it takes so much man hours and so much effort to keep it lifted up. So with you, I want to know, how did that come on your radar? When did you were you at the starting phase? What's your involvement in it? And kind of go down the firefighter rescue survey path, which it this might be a little bit of a longer path, but go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, I was a little bit frustrated, and this is going back to, I don't quite know when this started, but I started sending some emails out at the end of 2014 to try to encourage NIFers or NFers, however you say it, where you're listening, to add some more data fields. I wanted something that was more operationally. What I wanted to know is data on our operations, what's working, what's not working. Just, I was frustrated. All the data that we collected, all this stuff kind of went back to like 1973, 1974, 1975. And I thought, now we're in 2010s, we can do better. So I'd sent some emails to them going, hey, I'm wondering if we can get some data fields on, was anybody rescued? Where were they rescued? Where did we start flowing water from the exterior, interior? Do we know what kind of volumes they were flowing? So just kind of some 30,000 foot view operational stuff. It wasn't like a fully formed firefighter rescue survey thing. And I was not alone. I'd heard plenty of people talk about the frustration that we're really only capturing our losses in the fire service. We all have to come back and fill out these reports, but the numbers and the data sets that we're filling in are quantifying the negative. We're not really trying to quantify the positive or even qualify some of the positive. So there was some frustration there. And then fast forward just a little bit until February of 2016, I went to my first NFPA 1700 meeting. And they'd had one meeting already where I was not part of the technical panel or committee. But then they opened it up, brought a couple more people on. And so now we're in Vegas, and it was like a 2.5 day meeting. I'm going to get the days wrong, but we started on like a Thursday and we did all day. We did Friday all day. And then we were done by like noon on Saturday or whatever day of the week it was. And after the first 2 days, I'd heard the word rescue like once or twice, and I'd never once heard the word search. And we were really focused on data coming from UL. So UL really hadn't touched on search at that point in time, hadn't really touched on rescue. And even anything that we could talk about, like victim survivability or the victim itself, was still kind of like a little bit more indirect. We could talk about gas concentrations, and we could talk about heat flux, and we could talk about temperature, but couldn't really talk about what that meant to the victim at that point in time. So I remember raising my hand at the very end. We went around the room and I just asked, hey, just curious where search is going to fit into this. It's kind of one of this three parts of the triangle offense as I look at the fireground, where you have kind of search, attack, and ventilation. So wondering where search was going to fit in there, wonder where rescue was going to fit in there. And I was then tasked with, we had like a small subcommittee or committee. I forget who all was involved in that now, but our job before the next meeting was to figure out, is search going to live in this document? And if so, is it going to be shoehorned into one of the existing chapters because we already had an existing chapter, or is this going to be a new chapter? So as soon as I left there, I worked that next day after I got back, and I reached out to a guy named Brian Olson, out of Eagle, Idaho. And Brian, the reason I reached out to him is he was involved with firefighterrescues.com, which was a domain or URL owned by Kurt Isaacson, who runs CFT. And he was kind of the main guy running it. It had been run by other guys kind of prior to him. Broussard pops into my head, and I think there were others. But Olson was also diving into the NFPA and USFA data that we had on civilian casualties. So he knew, and we all had access to this, but he was putting this up on these big whiteboards at that time. So, like in January of 2016, he had like these three whiteboard pictures that I still have saved in my phone of where we're finding victims, what they were doing, um, uh, conditions at the victim's location, and whatever else we might have had at the time. It was still kind of a little bit indirect. There was a little bit more assumptions to it. Did they have working smoke alarms, stuff like that? So this was the only data that we had on victims at the time. So I reached out to him and started kicking this idea around of, hey, how are we going to get this in there? And how do we find data on this? Because 1700 definitely wanted to be driven by data. So we started kicking this around. He was good friends with Justin McWilliams at the time. And so he brought in Justin to the fold. Justin knew a guy named Shane Thomas. Justin is Justin McWilliams. Justin brought in Shane Thomas. Shane Thomas, I believe, knew Trent Morrison. And within like a month, we had a rough draft of the first iteration of Firefighter Rescue Survey. We had kind of beta tested this by sending this out to a bunch of our friends that we had known that had made rescues and just said, hey, break this for us. Try to figure out where the weaknesses are. Are these questions good? Are they bad? Should we add more questions? Should we change our answers? And then within 2 or 3 weeks, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 people had beta tested this for us. And we thought we had enough to go live with this. So in April of 2016 during FDIC, we went live with this and kind of put this out there into the ether going, hey, if you guys make a rescue, if you know somebody makes a rescue, fill out this survey. We just want to try to collect some data on this. So super grassroots, super organic. That first year, it caught a little bit of traction. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but 300 or 400 people had filled out surveys in the last 8 months of that year. And then once we got to like 500 surveys, I dissected all this data. This was going into like a Google Docs form. I dissected all this data and tried to make a handful of graphs and present this out to the fire service. Like, here's a little bit of information. Obviously, the sample size is really small, but maybe there's something here. And that's kind of when we started getting more feedback on, hey, you should ask this question. Hey, these answers don't capture everything. You're missing some buckets right here. Change your buckets right there. And then we kind of had the second iteration of the survey. So this is kind of a living survey where we now, because of the feedback that we got, either in-house and especially out-of-house, we've then kind of changed and edited the actual survey. So now we have the second iteration. It's a little bit better than this first iteration. And then after 1,000, we did the same thing. And then after 2,000, we did the same thing. And then 3,000, we did the same thing. And then 4,000, we did the same thing, except we brought in the lovely Mrs. Molly Scott, who's much better and much faster at analyzing all this data to analyze our data. So that's kind of the first time that I think we really had some full-on conversations, and then also had conversations with your lovely wife. And she saved me 2 weeks of my life last year by analyzing this data in assumedly like a couple hours on her end, and did a better job too. So huge thank you to you for hooking us up. And then a huge thank you for Molly for doing her work as well.
Yeah, I was it's one of those deals where Preston Lyons has talked about this when he did the podcast with his wife, where he's hard charging, and he's pretty open about, like, sometimes his wife would have to kind of pull the reins and be like, hey, do you really need to go to, I'm just making this up, the fifth conference in the year? And one of the things that she said was, like, look, if you just bring me in, just like, let me know what it's about. Let me know what you're doing, why, like, just loop me in. And then you're more likely to get some buy-in from your spouse. So I knew that Molly is just a rock star when it comes to Excel. Obviously, it's, what she does as CPA, and she likes fun little projects. And I didn't even talk to her about it before I offered up her services to you, Nick. I was like, I said, she might be mad, but she's gonna have to kind of deal with it. But I looped her in. I was like, hey, I reached out to Nick. I know that he's messing with a lot of stuff on Excel, and What we got a little stretch right here.
I've been sitting too much today, buddy.
So I said I said, look, I know that Nick is messing with Excel a whole lot, and I don't know how good he is at it. And if you're bad at it, then this is going to take a long time. That was my thought. I had no idea whether you were good or bad at it. Maybe you were great. So when I reached out, it was just kind of like, hey, I'm passionate about this. I think it's a really cool thing for the fire service because it helps us. Think about this, Nick, and I know you could speak to it. Like, who is teaching search out there that's not using the FRS data? There's almost nobody. Nobody, especially nobody that's at any I say reasonable level. Nobody that's known is not using FRS data because it's such an important piece. So for me, I was like, this project is so cool. If Molly can speed it up for these guys and make it good, then yeah, I'm gonna throw her name in the hat. And once again, she might be irritated. I say irritated. She might not like she might not like really crunching like CPA style numbers, but she likes projects. She likes like trying to fix things and figure little projects out in Excel. This was kind of right up her alley. So you went to her, she started messing with it, and I was like, hey, I'm sorry to dump that on you, but I appreciate you helping Nick out. And she was like, no, this is fun. I enjoy like solving the problems and figuring stuff out. She had to ask me stuff, and she did it for you too. She had to ask stuff like, what is VES? Like, how does that relate to on a Excel level? How does that relate to this, that, and the other? Um, but I wanted you to talk. I guess I kind of want to expand on that a little bit and have you talk about FRS, the on what it means for how it drives our searches, because you kind of you touched on a little bit. Where are the victims found? What kind of conditions are they found in? That kind of stuff. But like I want you to dig a little bit deeper on taking that data and then translating it to the real world of a firefighter versus like what we have now versus what we were going off back in the day before this stuff. Experiences versus, okay, some of those experiences might have been good and you might be saying the right things, but now's the data to back it up and we can get even better. So I kind of wanted you to just dig a little deeper on that.
Yeah, if we kind of went over kind of the origin story of FRS, but like how does this actually affect the fire ground, affect the victims, affect our training grounds? I think is what's more important about this, right? We need to take this kind of data or statistics to the street, and I think that's where this is super useful. Prior to FRS, we were going off an anecdote or anecdotes. If you lived in a city like I live in right now, my department prior to 2013 had made, as far as I'm aware, like two rescues in the previous like 20 years. And so people knew those two stories, but it was two stories to go off of. And now we have a sample size of over 4,000. And even though these are still kind of anecdotes, and the plural of anecdotes is not necessarily truth or science, we have a bigger sample size, bigger buckets to actually look in to figure out where are we actually finding people. So this is kind of one of the more important points that we have, I think. And this is where are victims located within structures. So that we can parse that out into multifamily versus single family. We can even parse that out a little bit more into commercial or other occupancies as well. But a data set that's as simple as where are victims found, what we're finding is that 45% of victims are found in bedrooms through 4,000 rescues. So it doesn't matter what time of day. We've taken this and tried to get a little bit more granular with this data as well. We know that at night that seems to make sense. But what about during the day? So we took this 24-hour clock, split that up into these 8 pieces of pie. So from like midnight to 3 in the morning, from 3 in the morning till 6 in the morning. And the number one spot that we were finding victims on all of these 8 pieces of pie were still in bedrooms. And it wasn't even really close. So you can look at that in a couple different ways. You can say that, hey, I need to make sure I'm prioritizing the bedrooms every single time. You can just make sure that, or you could just say, we're going to VES every single time because if I can get to a bedroom, I'm going to capture, say each house on average has 3 bedrooms, so there's a part of an artificial inflation there. in that there's 3 bedrooms in most houses, and there's not 3 kitchens in most houses. There's not 3 living rooms in most houses, right? So there's a little bit of an artificial inflation there. So you kind of have to understand this whole data set holistically, But what is it doing? How are we prioritizing our bedrooms and getting above the fire if it's a 2-story house with the fire on Division 1? When are we getting upstairs? Are we getting a little bit looser as soon as we get water on the fire? Are we doing both these kind of simultaneously? What does this look like now versus what did this look like maybe 10 years ago before we had some of this data? So I think we're doing a really good job of figuring out where we're finding our victims, when we're finding our victims, how we're finding our victims, meaning what crew is finding them. So we're like a really important one, and one that I kind of teach on a lot is that 25% of our victims, 24% technically, are found by fire attack. That's not too surprising since they're typically the first crew that's going to be inside. They're going to go from an access or egress spot to the fire. So they're covering a good hunk of the building as well, oftentimes. But what does that actually mean? So if if I'm attacked, am I trying to search on my way? Or do I just try to get that line to the fire as soon as I can? What happens when I stumble across a victim? If I am going down a hallway with a bedroom cluster and there's a couple of open doors, should I have my heel close those doors if he can or she can? Um, if I get to the fire room and visibility is halfway decent, should we do a quick little hot search in there before I take that visibility down to nothing by opening up that nozzle, even if I'm only covering a third of that room? So some of these things are very specific to each department and how many guys and gals you're sending on scene initially, what your operations looking like. But I think when you step back and you look at all these data sets holistically, conditions where the victim was found, I think it changes your operation. Not only does it change your operation, but it changes your mindset. This, I think, is the most important thing that we've done. So, getting very granular, looking at a specific skill set, a specific data set, very advantageous to us. But I think stepping back, looking at this holistically, and understanding that people can survive where we didn't think people could survive when I came into the fire service. I was told there's fire in the victim's room, nobody can survive in there. End of discussion. I was told that if the building is fully involved from the outside, nobody can survive in there. We now know that's not necessarily the case, right? People aren't going to survive if they're in the same spot as a post flashover fire, but maybe they're behind something. Maybe they're behind a door. Maybe they're 20 feet away. Maybe they're in kind of this dead end of a flow path right there. Maybe they're in the intake portion of a flow path. So writing people off from the outside, this kind of whole victim survivability profiling, I think we've kind of put a fork in that. And not only us, I think what you need to do is take our data, because what we have is experiential and it's very important data. But the gold standard of data is going to be someone that's following the scientific method. And the closest that the fire service has come to that, and probably will ever come to that, is what FSRI is doing. So if you can then overlay FRS data with FSRI data and see where they converge and where these confluences are, and if there's any divergences, what would explain those divergences, I think that's really what's advantageous and what's going to change the fire service. Take this kind of scientific experimental methodology, overlay that with kind of our experiential data that we have, and figure out where the alignment's at. Because that's probably some pretty hard truths at that point in time.
Yeah, I want to hit a couple of other points that I help that I teach the rookies at the things, but like there's a couple of the great data points that you guys dig into for the FRS, uh, 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 like how are these victims being removed? You know, because the book, what I learned from the book in 0708 was stuff like the blanket drag and the chair carry, and it's like none of these make any real sense, and they're still there. These dirty drags are simply not taught in any Jones and Bartlett book, and they're not taught in any IFSTA. Oh, look, you just so happen to have it. Yeah, so
I got it right
you
here.
just so happen to have it. Yeah, this is not it's not yeah, it's not shocking. And once again, you can go look for if you don't believe us, go look for yourself. Go open up IFSTA, go open up the latest in Jones and Bartlett, and go find what how they're actually telling us to pull people out. And then I go sit through Sean Duffy's class, Searchable versus Survivable, back in 22, I think. And he's, crossing guys' legs and dragging them across the floor in this dirty drag. And I'm going, well, I've never seen that before. And then you go to all these conferences and everybody's teaching this. but nobody's teaching it at the, like, nobody taught me. It wasn't being taught at the rookie level. So one of the things that y'all do is you say, hey, what are you using to get guys out? And overwhelmingly, the guys that are actually making grabs and reporting this stuff are saying it was some form of dirty drag. Very rarely was it anything else. You know, you might have a piece of webbing or something. Guys have used that and it works, but it's been said 1,000 times on 1,000 podcasts, you know, to build that hasty harness, to build out your webbing drag with gloves on, zero vis, high heart rate, that whole thing is, man, some guys can do it, but it's not the reality of the guys that are actually pulling out. So why don't we train on the thing that's actually being done? Dirty drags. Well, let's show you some. Here's the cross leg. You know, here's cross leg low drag. Here's the out of Cobb County, the simple wrist lock. Like, the wrist lock is nowhere in IFSTA, but grabbing onto a guy's wrist and securing it and pulling works pretty dang well. But it you have to put it up here before it even becomes an option for you to start it. Another point that you didn't mention, which I think is super good when it talks about search priority, is the people that were found and survived. Talking about, were they assigned to RIT first, or were they assigned were they, like, was it RIT before search? Because if it was, the survivability of the victim goes down. Search before RIT, survivability goes up. What's the other one I'm missing on that same slide? I'm drawing a blank. Not only RIT, help me out.
Yeah, fire attack.
Oh
So
yes, fire. Yeah,
is not
before during.
are we searching? Was search initiated before fire was knocked down or after fire was knocked down? And now we've had it simultaneous. We've added that in there too, to be on the advice of Keith Stakes, to have this kind of common language. So that's how they're doing this. This is how they're splitting this up. Are you searching before fire attack or before knockdown, or with suppression or after suppression? And then is it door initiated versus window initiated? So we're trying to make sure that we're speaking the same language as well. And just kind of defining some of these terms was the first thing that we had to do. Rescue wasn't even defined. Uh, uh, is an assist or an evacuation the same as a rescue? We had to define these terms to begin with. So rescue wasn't really defined for the entirety of the fire service. So that's kind of the first thing that we did that kind of had somewhat of an impact. And some people don't like our definition, and that's more than okay. We're more than willing to amend this definition if somebody gives us a better definition. We try to be open minded to all this, knowing that we don't know everything, and now we're up to 15 people that are part of this. So there's a bunch of other people that are involved since kind of the original 5 people, and they do a bunch of the lifting for this thing, as you kind of alluded to. But one of the first things that we had to do was just define some of these terms, and it seems so simple. Like, well, how do you define rescue? That took us a lot longer than you might expect, just to define a word that seems kind of tacit to most people.
I kind of like talking to you about stuff like this. And anybody that's on the forefront of developing something that's new, because it's kind of shocking, right? We've been as a fire service, we've been around for so long, and yet it's some guys in 2014, 15, 16 that are having to sit around and say, "What's a rescue?" Like, that hopefully is going to be able to be more solidified and become like an actual thing that everybody understands and knows what it is. But you guys had to sit down and talk about it. Um, I want to I want to nerd out a little bit. I want to nerd out a little bit when it comes to sample sizes with FRS. I've talked to you about this through text, and look, if you're not a nerd, maybe skip this portion of the podcast. Here's my concern with FRS, and feel free to debunk me if you'd like. You start piling in all these rescues, thousands of rescues, right? And similar to averaging out a score in a test, right? If you go through a whole school semester where you're making nothing but 90s and above, you got an A, and it's a heavily weighted A. And then when you get to the end of the year, it's going to be really, really hard within one test to bump you off of that A, right? You could probably make a 0 on the final, but you're so heavily weighted one way because you've got so much data dumped into that one thing that the needle's not going to move. My concern with FRS, and I want you to kind of see if you've had the same concern, is that you pile in 4,000 rescues, 5,000 rescues. Let's say you get to 7,000, 8,000 rescues, and you say, hey, we're finding about 45% of our victims in the bedrooms. At some point, it's going to be so heavily weighted that it's going to take some astronomical number to move it off of 45. Are y'all concerned that, because like with the scientific method or with basic statistics, you can draw some reasonably small sample sizes to gather data on large data sets. So now you guys are pulling in some pretty big amounts of data, probably well over what our sample size needs to be um, to create some reliable numbers. It, are y'all worried that y'all are everything's going to start to kind of hit an equilibrium where the numbers aren't going to move very much, and we're going to have to transition to something else, and maybe we switch to like trends where it's like, okay, from this, the first thousand was this, the second thousand, we're seeing a trend move in a different direction. And I keep repeating myself, but after 10,000 rescues, I don't think the 11,000 is going to shift it over that much. What's your thought on that?
No, I think you're spot on. I think the way to go around that is exactly like you talked about. Well, let's look at the last 12 months then. Let's look at the last 1,000. Are we seeing anything significantly different in this last 1,000 than we did in the previous 1,000? And we can do this, and it's going to be a lot easier once we have a a working dashboard, because it's going to be a couple mouse clicks to make all this happen. Right now, it's a relatively heavy lift, especially if you are a firefighter and not somebody who deals with Excel or whatever these other programs might be in the future, day in, day out. But I think you're bringing up a really good point. And one of the biggest things that we have found is that kind of the just the survival rate initially, survival percentage, excuse me, survival percentage initially was something on the order of 60%. And then it went up. If you looked at like the first 1,000 versus the second 1,000, second 1,000, it was like 64%. And then the third 1,000, it was something like 69%. And then it was like 72%. So is there a bit of a survivor bias that's creeping into this thing, that people are more apt and more willing to put in the rescues where the person survives versus the one where the person does not survive? So I think the best way to do this is exactly what you talked about. And I'm not a statistician, and maybe there's a better way, but the best way that I know how to do this is to break it down by thousands as well and start looking at these trends and graphing them just across bigger, broader scopes, or spans, where we have each kind of data set, and we have the first thousand, second thousand, third thousand, 4,000, and just see what we're seeing. Are they linear, or are they have a steeper slope? And if they do have a steeper slope, let's look into that. Why might they have a steeper slope? Why is this data set changing? Why are we not finding 45% of victims in bedrooms anymore, but now that number is down to 34%, or whatever that happens to be, right? So I think you bring up a good point, and that's something that we may need to make sure that we're aware of. I think what USFA does right now is they do a lot of 10-year data sets and then also annual data sets as well. So then you can look at each annual data set and start figuring out what those trends are. Um, so I'm not super concerned, but I am somewhat concerned with these things. If I start seeing numbers after 5,000 start to drop, that's something significant must have changed, to drop some of those numbers that have an N of 5,000 already. And if it's dropping a little bit, a couple percentage points, why is that? Like, let's look into that. Are we doing a better job of having people, making sure they're sleeping with their bedroom doors closed? Are we doing a better job of isolating and ventilating? Are we doing a better job of maybe not bringing the victim back down past the fire or the toxic and thermal threat? We're isolating and ventilating, or isolating, ventilating, and waiting. Is our training better? Are we not lifting victims up in the air anymore, but we're dragging them and keeping their head at the 1 foot or below level?
Yeah,
So I
that
think those are all things that are super important.
that's something with that FSRI just put out within the last couple of years, right? The levels of toxic smoke and gases and all that stuff. And yeah, you're right. One of the common lifts, right, is to go underneath the arms, not something that we teach, but going underneath the arms
Yeah.
and picking the victim up. And that might seem like a decent idea. There's reasons why it's bad. Slippery victim, they're unconscious, they're too heavy, no clothes on, that type of stuff. But also, more importantly, with FSRI, picking them up into that nasty environment. So you have some combination of data to be able to see from the scientific side, the official scientific side with FSRI, and then saying, okay, we know this is bad. How can we use stuff like dirty? Okay, now we got dirty drags from the firefighter rescue survey. What dirty drags can we use that's going to keep the victim's airway down? Because that's what the real rescues say, and that's what the science side says. So let's change our training in order to try to match that stuff. So I think all that's good. You mentioned something earlier that I want to tap on, the dashboard. I know that it's being developed, so I don't want you don't have to obviously deep dive into this because we're not there yet. But the book of search allowed the book of search that Corley put out and was able to raise a lot of funds for the firefighter rescue survey to help you guys produce a better product, because obviously Corley's very passionate about this exact same thing. So if you wanted to kind of touch on either the book of search and the money raised and how y'all are kind of trying to improve it on y'all's side, well, I just want you to tap on that.
So I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Corley for putting this together. All of the authors, the 43 authors that were involved, the illustrators, the photographers, everybody donated all their time, all their intellectual property, all their photographs. They all donated this for a great cause. And I want to say thank you to Fire Nuggets who helped out at the very beginning of this as well. I'm a little bit biased, but a big fan of that crew. So Jeff Bryant and all the other e-board members and Lane Zahorik who helped out with that as well. So thank you to everybody that was involved in that project, because that now gave us some capital that we get to have some fun with. So kind of what we're hoping to do is we are working with FSRI right now on a dashboard. They're kind of waiting on our end right now. It's a little bit kind of above my understanding, but we're trying to get a 401c3 okayed, or ArcGIS account okayed through our 401c3, something like that. Jason Marshall knows a little bit more about this than I do, but in the not too distant future, I think we're going to have a working dashboard with the help of FSRI. So anybody can go in there and then kind of manipulate our data. They can play around with it. And let's say that they have a bunch of 3-story center hall apartments going up in their district. They can then go and look at multifamily dwellings and then 3-story buildings, and then they can look at fires on Division 1 and Division 2 or Division 3 and ladder rescues versus going interior, or window initiated search versus going through a door initiated search, and just kind of figure out what seems to be working for the vast majority of the fire service, figuring out what might not be working for the vast majority of the fire service. And maybe that changes some of their training or some of their operations, or maybe it inspires them to try something new in their training, and they figure out, hey, here's our plan A. If we have a fire in this center hall 3-story building, we're going to send one crew in here, another crew in there, and we're going to have like more of a pincher attack or whatever that is, right? Whatever they come across to it. But then anybody will be able to play with this data and get as granular as they want with it. Hopefully they can figure out just in, like, maybe they want to look at just Louisiana because FDNY doesn't represent where they're living at in Louisiana. So we'll throw the FDNYs and the Bostons and whoever else out, and we can just look at our area. Or maybe our area has 75 rescues. Let's look into that. I can maybe even contact some of these people if we can make that happen. I know where this rescue happened. I can maybe reach out to this department and maybe they can come in and teach us what they did or what they learned from this fire. So that's one of the things that we want to do. The other thing that we're pretty excited about as well, and I don't think we've talked about this anywhere yet, to my knowledge, at least not on a podcast, but we are working with FSRI, and I'm not quite sure on a timeline right now, but we're hoping to put together some videos, kind of a la brass tacks, hard facts, but with the focus on search and making sure that this is just like brass tacks does as well. But this is developed with and in accordance with the data that we have. So with FSRI and with FRS data. So they have been a great partner of ours. And now with this capital that we have, we can then expand our reach and expand the product and hopefully make this turnkey for a lot of people that haven't heard about, a leg lock or a wrist lock, boom, here's some video of Sean Duffy doing a leg lock. And now everybody has access to this on the internet, and it's produced well, and it's a high quality piece that people can utilize. Just like we still use, I'm a captain of suppression at my department. There's not a training that goes by where we don't use those brass tacks, hard facts videos in our trainings. So that's kind of what we want to do on the search end. And we think we have data, we think we have the connections to make this happen. So those are kind of our two big projects that we have moving forward that we're really excited about. And we couldn't be more excited than to partner with a great organization like FSRI.
Excellent. Um, yeah, no doubt. Very excited for what, how y'all are going to use that capital to be able to once again improve what was already such a useful product. I'll say it again. I don't know who's teaching search without using FRS data. It just seems like it almost be like trying to at this point it's like be like trying to drive a car without a steering wheel. It's like why would you not include that? To me it's almost vital at this point if you're going to teach that particular topic. Um so I'm gonna hop off. We're gonna hop to. We spent a lot of time on FRS. You've been involved with NFPA, or you are involved with NFPA. You've been involved in a lot of other stuff on the scientific side. Um, what about what about how you got involved with that? Talking about the scientific side, like talking about getting into not just. I mean, data collection is scientific, but it's just people that are voluntarily dumping their information into your database and then trying to figure out what goes where. But I kind of wanted to talk about that, and then I wanted to move into. You mentioned something that I really liked on another podcast with imposter syndrome, and I'm gonna screw the quote up, but you almost said like the guard is out of the guard shack, and I've had that same feeling about. I've had that exact same feeling, not to your level, but you're in all these different rooms, and part of all these things. So I want you to talk about that and that same feeling, like just kind of your talk of an imposter syndrome. So go ahead.
Yeah, let's start with just my love of data, my love of science. I do think that the scientific method is the best tool that mankind has ever developed to try to find the answers, to try to find truth, to try to find facts. So I have always had this bias, this overt bias towards data, towards science, towards a solid methodology and a solid foundation. So I've always been drawn to that. And I brought up that I went to a class by, I think at the time, Lieutenant John Sorello at FDNY. I think he might be a battalion chief now. Do not quote me on that. But I was excited. I was going to go to a ventilation class. And it was a guy from FDNY. That's all I knew at the time. I was unfamiliar with the work of Sorello at the time. And so I was thinking, we're going to talk about roof ops. We're going to talk about cutting holes. We're going to talk about coffin cuts and 798s and all this cool stuff. And it was an 8-hour class, if I remember correctly. And we didn't talk about roof operations at all. We talked about the ventilation study that I was unaware of at the time. And I don't even know if it had been released at this point in time. So this is going back to 2010. I'm not quite sure. The two knucklehead firemen from Colorado Springs brought him in. But my mind was blown. It wasn't what I was expecting. It wasn't what I wanted when I went in there. But then once I got in there and I realized, hey, there's a group that's actually figuring out what happens when we open and close doors, when we open and close windows, before even any water is applied. They're just opening doors and windows and seeing what happens to the fire. And my mind was blown. And I was like, this is exactly what the fire service needs. Now we're bringing actual like science to this. I know FSRI tends to push back when we call them kind of the scientists of safety or the safety scientists, but I think that's exactly what they're doing. It might not be exactly following the scientific method, but it's as close as we can realistically get and pragmatically get in 2025 now. And I was now then introduced to FSRI, and so this is when this fanboying kind of started. This I figured out who Steve Kerber was, and who Dan Medrikowski was, and who Robin Zavotek was, and Ed Harton, and Paul Grimwood, and all these people that were not on my radar up till then. And this is kind of the cool correlate right here. I was reaching out to them, as you talked about with Eric Wheaton and others, and they were answering my questions. And I was reading their blog posts and reading their articles and getting my hands on their books and reading their studies. I totally went down this rabbit hole into fire dynamics and fire behavior relatively early on in my career, and I loved it because it was science. We're talking about, if you took a step back, it maybe wasn't quite so overtly, but they're talking about the conservation of mass. They're talking about the conservation of energy. They're talking about um, these scientific principles that are the laws of the universe. And I'm like, oh, now I understand this fire ground a little bit more. We're talking about Thornton's rule or Thornton's law. And I'm like, now I understand the fire ground. I was always super confused when it came to ventilation because, like, literally in my IFSA version three, okay, 3 or 4, I can't remember when I came in, but when I came in 2007, there was like a short paragraph, and it was kind of this run-on sentence that was punctuated in the middle with a semicolon. And my memory of this was like, ventilation can be really great. It can lead to lifting and leading, and the the enhanced survival percentage for civilians, semicolon, or it can lead to conflagrations and rapid fire progression and worsening of conditions for civilians caught inside. And I was like, that semicolon is doing some heavy lifting right here. Like, what are we talking about?
Ventilation is everything.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be
yeah, like
super
it's good
great,
and it's
or it could
bad.
be the worst thing ever. Sure.
Yeah, and then once I heard about Thornton's law or Thornton's rule and the conservation of mass and conservation of energy and Art Arnelich and being in these rooms with these really smart people and talking to these really smart people, I started to have kind of an understanding. I felt like I was seeing the Matrix. Like when Neo can actually look at the code and see what's happening. Like that's what I felt like was what was happening to me. Like it's a little bit of hyperbole, but I was
Sure.
actually gaining an understanding of this. And so then I applied. I was a fanboy at this point in time, and UL opened up applications for their next study. And this was going to be kind of their third in what I call the ventilation trilogy. They'd done horizontal, they had done vertical, and now they were going to do positive pressure ventilation, positive pressure attack. And so I put my hat in the ring. And again, there was no reason for them to pick me. They shouldn't have picked me. I had done nothing up till that point. Worked for a small suburban fire department in Colorado and had written a couple of pretty pathetic blogs, if we're going to be honest. And somehow got picked up. They needed another guy from a small department that nobody had ever heard of to come be part of their team. And now I'm in a room with Art Arnelich and Carol Lambert and Ian Bolton, these guys from outside of America, as well as Colin Kelly and Scott Corrigan and all these heavy hitters from inside America as well. And I'm like, I have no idea how I got into this room, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to keep my mind open, my ears open, and I'm going to try to get better because of this. And I'm going to try to befriend some of these people and ask them dumb questions, and they're going to get annoyed with me, but I'm going to leave a little bit smarter.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how this happened. There's this quote that I love, and I'm going to attribute this to Michael Scott slash Wayne Gretzky. But it's you miss 100% of the shots you never take. I say this all the time, and honestly, it's been the best thing for me. Like, there's no reason for me to apply to teach at FDIC the first year that I taught there. There was no reason for me to apply to UL at the time, and no reason for them to accept me, but they did. There was no reason for NFPA to say, "Hey, why don't you come into this group?" There was no reason for me to reach out to Brian Olson and ask him these dumb questions. Um, but more often than not, it's worked out in my favor. And so I would encourage anybody here to reach out to people, to put yourself out there, to, if you have the time and you have the bandwidth and you have the passion and the motivation, to put yourself out there. Try to be part of that next, your technical rescue team or your hazmat team, or to teach at a conference, or to go to a different conference, or to go to a different domain and hop on an ambulance, or go back to paramedic school, or whatever it is. Like, just put yourself out there.
Yeah.
That's been the best thing in my career, was just asking and people blindly and stupidly saying yes to me.
Yeah. All good stuff. I know that for you I said this in the beginning of the podcast, we are going to touch it, and you just reminded me. I'm talking about reaching out to people and just kind of doing the thing. Is that one of the things that I reached out to you about is saying go and teach at a conference. I have no desire to teach anywhere. I really don't. I'm not putting in for anything. When I had Chief Shannon Stone on the podcast with his brother DJ, one of the things that DJ said was that he doesn't put in anywhere. He doesn't put in for anything except for FDIC. He goes, if you want me to come teach somewhere, if I can make it work, I'll come teach. And I like that. I like that whole mentality. But one of the things that I'd reached out, the point of this story is to say I'd reached out to you because I had taught a few times in our recruit academy, teaching a search program. And then I got asked to teach at a little micro conference and I panicked. I panicked because it's just right next door, small conference, 20, 30 people. Because I was like, that's not like I don't have that goal. That's not what I'm trying to do. And also the other big thing was um the material that I had was mostly coming from Dustin Martinez. It was basically Cobb search program. And over the years, I was cutting it up. I was taking some Cobb stuff out, changing slides, putting my stuff in. But it was still, I only ever intended it to be for us. Like, this is our little thing. And then I remember when I got asked, I said, no, like, I'm not, like, go find somebody else. Go get Dustin and bring him in. Like, I'm not your guy. They have 1,000 other guys teaching search that are way better. And I remember calling Dustin and I remember calling you, and y'all both said essentially the same thing. Like, go make it better. Like, go make the fire service better. Like, go crush it is essentially what your message was. And then that led to Chief Sparacello and Hammond saying, hey, Rob Ramirez he's stuck on deployment. Do you want to come teach at Small Town? And I was like, now that's a considerably bigger conference, but I didn't ask to do that. But once again, panic, like, whoa, I'm not. And you end up once again finding yourself in rooms where you're like, I don't belong in this. It's a weird and uncomfortable feeling, and I don't think I'm ever gonna. Not that I have, once again, I have a desire to teach all over the place, but it's a feeling that I'm glad that when you have it, it's like validation for me to go, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, I don't need to go sit down with a psychologist to figure out why my brain is broken on this particular thing, because I have this same thing. I don't belong. I shouldn't be here talking to Nick Ledin on a podcast. I shouldn't be, doing, in these rooms with these people. So anyway, I'm glad that you bring that up. I tell that to say, uh, thank you. I'm probably, well, I might be a little crazy, but I'm not crazy on this particular topic.
I think so. I still have imposter syndrome to this day in most rooms that I'm in. I remember hearing something along the lines of you become the aggregate of the people that you surround yourself with. And so one of my goals is just to make sure that the people that I surround myself with are passionate, they're purposeful, they're intentional, and they're knowledgeable, and they kind of have a good perspective on everything. So that's kind of my goal, is just to get into these rooms. I try to keep my mouth shut more often than not, but I'm going to ask some dumb questions. I'm going to put my foot in my mouth. No question about it. And I just give myself a little bit of kind of like grace, for lack of a better word, in that, going, all right, I'm going to sound dumb, but I'm going to get a little bit better because of this. I'm worried about not so much Nick today or Nick next week, but like the Nick that I want to be in 20 years. And I think the best way to get there is to read really good books, have really good conversations with people, and to be in these rooms where big stuff is happening.
No doubt. All right. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about, this is something that Corley wanted to bring me on to talk about in the scrap. It was literally, I want to say it was the reason, and we ended up not talking about it at all. But the thing that he wanted to talk about was truth on social media, and how do we deal with things on the internet that we know are wrong, specifically to the fire service, um, and who is the arbiter of truth, and once again, how do we deal with it? And it was an issue for me where I called him, or I texted him. It turned into a call because I had saw something that I knew was objectively wrong, and I have a pretty open mind. Um, I can deep dive on some topics there. I can be open minded to say, hey, I might be wrong on this, but there was something that was said by a well respected person in the fire service, and I didn't know how to handle it because I knew it was wrong. And early in my fire service career back in '07, '08, I remember fighting every battle online. I grew up on the internet. I say I grew up on the internet. The internet came to be by the time I was, 14, 15, 16. And so I saw this whole evolution, but I remember when I first came into the fire service, if you were wrong on the internet, I was not going to allow it. Like I would fight every single battle. And I have thankfully, when I hit my early 30s, kind of backed off of that because I felt like it wasn't as productive as I thought it was going to be. I thought I could change everybody's mind. If I tell you you're wrong and I'm going to show you all the facts, I'm going to just hit you with fact after fact. And I realized that maybe it wasn't I was probably doing a little more harm than good. So I ran into this problem of the fire service where I don't do battles online anymore. It's not something I participate in, but I saw it and I was like, how do I handle that? And I got with Corley, and I want to get your opinion on this, but I got with Corley, and Corley essentially said, look, if they do the other thing, if they do the opposite of what's being said, or if they do the thing that was said, what harm comes from that? And the answer in that particular case was there's nothing. It's not going to change anything. And he said, well, if there's no harm in it, then maybe just let it go. And that was that was difficult to hear, but because now we have wrong information that is going to perpetuate potentially, we got generations or firemen after firemen, young firemen are going to listen to that or see it and go, yeah, this is a real thing. And I know I'm being vague, but I'm obviously being intentionally vague. But there's something in my soul that says, hey, I got to correct that. So I'm gonna kick it over to you, Nick, and we can maybe bounce this back and forth of like how do you handle when it comes to the fire service and data driven outcomes, data driven training. How do we handle wrong stuff on the internet? What do you think?
So I think I have a couple overarching kind of rules here. The first one is kind of as Corley alluded to, is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? So this could mean a couple different things. This could mean if somebody did X as the person might have stated, is there any negative outcome to this? And if there's not, the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze. If there is a significant negative outcome, all right, let's then consider this. So that's step one. Does it have a negative outcome? The second step would be, what's the reach of this person? Does this person have 10,000 or 500 followers and everyone's going to see this post and it's going to get reshared 1,000 times? Or is this something that in a timeline, this person posts 20 things a day and one of them gets one like, and so nobody's going to see this, so it's just going to die in the infinite internet anyways? So if the answer to either one of those is like nobody's going to see it or there's no negative untoward effect, like I'm not going to waste my time doing that. So I'm pretty intentional if I'm going to get involved in something. The next rule that I have is I'm going to make sure that I'm very respectful when I respond to this person. This person probably is doing this from a good place. They just might have the wrong information. I'm sure we can all think of somebody that taught us something in our career that they thought was the right thing. And at the time, nobody might have known better. Like holding on to a wall when we searched the whole time, or holding on to a partner's boot the whole time that we searched. When I was taught, that's what I was taught. My right before I came in, maybe it was a couple years before, Rhino went through and he was told that you never lose track of this wall. So if there's like a bookshelf, you dump the bookshelf and crawl over the bookshelf, because that wall, that's life right there. So like a significant thing, right? So like that's what they were taught, but the people didn't really know better at the time, or at least the instructors didn't know better at the time. So I'm going to be very respectful when I approach this person. I'm probably going to do this in private initially, and just say, hey, and I'm going to start with a compliment, going, hey, dude, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I think that you have been a mentor of mine from, say, I don't know this person. You've been a mentor of mine, and I've appreciated so much of what you do. I do have a problem with what you posted today, and I've done this a couple of times in my career. I got a problem with what you said, and I might massage the wording a little bit, but this is kind of the gist of what I'm saying is like, hey, I don't think that's accurate. Here's data that refutes your point. The next part is like, I want to make sure I have data to back this up. Um, so I just have data to back this up and just start a conversation with this person. And if it gets to the point where they are pushing back, or I think they're being obtuse and potentially harmfully so, then I'll make a post of my own, probably is how I would go about this, just stating a different point of view. and hope that gains some traction. I probably won't go on their post or a comment and bash this person. I'm not going to bash them openly, but I'm just going to make my counterpoint and back this up with evidence. That would be my kind of route I think that I would go on. I need maybe a little bit more specifics to an issue, but that's kind of what my first thoughts are on this. What do you think about either those rules or what you would do?
No, no, I completely agree with you. Obviously Corley had mentioned the reach, not the, I'm sorry, he had mentioned the impact, and I didn't even think about the reach. So
Okay.
Corley had, so obviously Corley had mentioned the outcome side of it. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter, right? So don't fight it. I didn't even think about the reach side of it. But that is something to consider. Obviously, boy, I think you're right on the private side, like text. And I say text them. A lot of these people, I don't have their, but like you message them on Facebook because that's usually the big
Yeah.
platform, or you DM them or whatever the case, and you kind of go that shit sandwich approach, right? It's bread and then shit and then bread. So hey, I like what you're doing, big mentor. I kind of have an issue with this, but look, I love that you love the fire service. Keep it up, blah blah blah. So I think that that's a perfectly valid approach. One of the things that was mentioned by Corley is he's talking about uh, whether being right and being effective, right? So you can be right, but you might not be effective. And I don't want to go into too many details, but he said that there was basically a guy in the fire service that was the long-standing expert in the topic that he was an expert in. Then there was the new kid on the block within the same realm, the same topic within the fire service. And he said what was happening is the new kid on the block was challenging and talking to the older guy, the guy that kind of had the veteran of that particular topic, and he was attacking him. Not attacking him, but saying like, "Hey, you're wrong on this. You're wrong on this. Here's why you're wrong on this." And it turns out the new guy was right. The new guy was I'm talking in generalities. The new guy was bringing up some good points about why those things were wrong. The issue was that the guy came off so much like, I don't want to say an asshole, but he came off so as a matter of fact and so aggressive that the fire service generally kind of pushed that guy out. He was so part of the fight with social media and part of the do we address this thing or not is, are we, yes, he might have been correct, but if you're so aggressive with what you're talking about, then you're not effective because you kind of get banished by points like this. I don't even want to be around this dude. Dude's an asshole. I've been caught up in that to some degree early in my career because I would argue everything with everyone. I was the guy who just loved to argue. I've been known early on in my department that like, oh, Chris wants to argue about stuff. And for the early on in my career, for the most part, they were right. Like I just loved debate. Loved it. Was I effective? Probably not. So that goes back to when we talk about, are we going to interject into these conversations? Are we going to call somebody out? I think that that is something that we really have to figure out. Do we want to just be right to support our own ego, or do we want to make an effective change back towards truth? That's that's something that, I think that we need to have that conversation. That's something when including what's the reach, does it hurt, but also is barreling through this going to cause you more damage because you're just raw, your elephant, you might be the correct elephant, but you just ran over a whole crowd of people, and they're like, we don't like that elephant at all. You might be right, but he's plowing through people. So it's something, I don't know if you wanted to kind of see what you thought on that.
No, I don't think I have anything to add other than there's a lot of wisdom in that point right there, especially if we're talking like long-term social capital or political capital. Like if you are then going all in on something that doesn't really matter, or even if it does, you're going all in and you're going to end up losing, even if you're right, you got the cards. Like, is that really worth it? Is that the right move to make?
Right. Once again, what's your point? Are you just trying to beat your chest and say you're right? Or are you actually, excuse me, are you actually trying to influence and change people's mind? And so that it's part of that balance of we've got to kind of figure that part out. So, yeah, I wanted to add that little component. Yeah, privately I think is a way, um, but part of it is the public. You almost part of me wants to do it publicly because if you can get it, it's both good and bad. Publicly, everybody sees, like, what is your point? Like, okay, I would like this individual to see my side of this version, but I want everybody else to see what is the truth. Like, if you're saying the sky is, the sky is purple, but it's clearly blue or whatever the case is, like, I want everybody to know that the sky is indeed not purple. It's definitely blue, but that causes a lot of strife. That causes a lot of back and forth. So I think private is the answer, especially when you're dealing we talked about it earlier. We actually talked about it on the phone. Elephant brain, right? How is that? You put it out publicly, and if that person's elephant brain, and we all have it, we all have the elephant brain, gets angry. Like they might be, if it's especially if it's public and you're like calling them out, they might immediately go into defensive mode, and then they almost shut down. Like, no, I'm going to show you why I'm blah blah blah, and then you're not having any good discourse. You're not having any good discourse back and forth. So, I agree with you on reach. I agree with you um, on impact. Does it really matter? And probably handle it privately, depending on the individual that you're talking about. But once again, I'll say this: early on, when I was arguing with everybody about everything, it didn't make any difference. Most of the time, it didn't matter. Um, you weren't going to change their opinion. But I will say there was this one individual, and this is a caveat that doesn't. It's just there was a there's a personal friend that we have that would stalk my page, see the arguments that I was making on a particular topic where I knew I was correct on it, and I would argue with everybody on this particular topic with all kind of data and facts and like real science. And she was on the wrong side. I knew that she originally held the wrong position. And then she messaged me years later and essentially told me, "Hey, I've been watching your arguments back and forth, and I have now switched sides because of the arguments that you had made." That was the one win that I'd ever been publicly told after all of this time. So my point is, when I like to say I want it to kind of be public because I want everybody to kind of see. I want the truth to be exposed that the sky is in fact blue. There's no way around it. I want everybody to see that. Whereas if you have it privately, they don't get to see that. But to your point, I think that it creates it could create tension if it's a public affair. And look, I'm gonna call out Justin McWilliams real quick because he is he is I'm not going to say intentionally provocative. He puts his point out there and he does say, "Hey, I want to know what you think on this when it comes to search techniques. I think it's this, or here's the thing I'm posing. What do you believe back on this thing?" And it's all public. Like it's everything is he does it on the search culture page, and then when he responds to you, it's generally as Justin McWilliams, and he wants to have that back and forth. So to his like, I almost feel like when I talk about saying things publicly, he's kind of in that camp of like, I want everybody to see the arguments back and forth. I say arguments, discussions back and forth,
Yep.
so that we all have the same information versus me and Nick don't agree on a thing and we're going privately back and forth through DMs, and then I don't want to say nobody has the answer, but nobody sees the fact that Nick said this thing and then Chris said this thing and then Nick, like there's a long back and forth chain, but it's only me and you that are affected. Nobody sees the blue and purple debate. And it's like, what are we really trying to do if your mission is to influence the fire service? If it's to influence the fire service toward a better position, but we only ever have private conversations, uh, it's difficult. The pulling somebody over to your way of thinking is such a long and difficult process that, man, that goes into like societal stuff, but like getting people on your side of the argument is so tough. And I don't know, it's the long game. It's the Rob Fisher, right? 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. It's like always staying focused on the mission and knowing that your one interaction with whoever you're talking to is not the interaction. It's going to take years of building the resume, but years of conversation and consistency to try to get them over.
Yeah, you're not wrong. People do not like to change their minds. That's just kind of human nature. So, for the female that changed her mind on that issue, kudos to you for your strong arguments, and kudos to her for being open minded. Because humans, as much as I love humans, my favorite people are humans. Like we have some pretty big flaws as a species, and like we don't like to change. Once we're dug in, we just dig in more, as opposed to letting somebody like pull us out sometimes. One other tool that I do have sometimes, if it gets to this point, so I kind of have this rough algorithm in my head where is it worth it, yes or no? I'm going to reach out privately and just see if they'll either revise their post, take down their post, or something like that, or at least have a conversation with that person. If that doesn't work, like I'm respectful this entire time, making sure that I'm using data to back this up. But I also have some bulldogs that I know that I might send them a screenshot of this, like, hey, did you see this, dude? And let these guys do my bidding for me. I do the same thing at work. I know that I only have so much capital at work, like social political capital, either at work or in the internet sphere. Like, I'm not going to use it on a whole lot of issues. One thing that I have used it on is to try to go after, and this isn't one person, this is just two in, two out. We made sure that when we wrote our two in, two out paper, that it was backed by data. And for sure, we have our own biases going into this, but I think the data speaks for itself, and the data tells the story and leads you down a path that I think there's only one conclusion of. At least that's what my biased mind sees when I look at this data. But making sure that everything is like all our I's are dotted, all our T's are crossed. Here you go, world. This is what we think of two in, two out, as opposed to maybe a more emotional, brainstem driven rant on social media about whatever the topic of the day might be. I know that this happens a lot in the fire service, but it happens a lot in the broader world as well, whether it's politics, whether it's religion, whatever it is. Emotion tends to rule out over the neocortex and rationality too often. So the other thing that I might do is not respond right away. Like, go have a snack, go work out, think about this for, 20 minutes or an hour, and be like, okay, do I still want to respond to this person? And if I do, it's usually I'm a little bit less kind of amygdalic right there and a little bit more neocortex at that point in time.
Yeah, I've had that before too. I've sought counsel. Like when I would see something, I'd make a phone call. Like, what do I do about this? They
Yeah.
say, don't respond. Whatever you do, don't respond. And that's usually the correct answer. Like that's usually like okay, let me kind of breathe on this, and we're just not going to participate in that particular thing. In the end, once again, trying to get somebody shifted over. Mike Galliano said it when he did his "This House Rocks" class. The last thing that he said, and we're not going to go down this path, but the point that he was making was, don't talk politics within the firehouse. And he said at the end, he goes, because nothing that the one thing that we know has never happened is that somebody said, well, you know what? At the end of this conversation, you know what? You were right. And now I'm going to take on your side of the thing. That he goes, that's never happened. And it only ever causes division. So the arguments are so difficult to switch that, it's like you said, it's a long standing problem within society or with humans in general. Um, all right. From there, I think we're gonna hop into that's a 6 hour conversation. That's a long topic that we could probably go on for a while, but we'll tie it up. From there, we're gonna hit the last two topics because we're running up on an hour and a half. We're gonna hit the last two questions that I ask pretty much every guest. Before I ask them, I do want to touch on the podcast very quickly, and it's more as a thank you. I listened to the Fire Nuggets for quite a while, along with there has certain staples in there. Corley Moore's Scrap is obviously one of them. The Horton Brothers do a great one. Preston, I listen to all the Preston stuff, but the Fire Nuggets is up there. And then also, I told you earlier, part of this platform was to it's to document the original was to document the history of our fire service of our like South Louisiana kind of area, talking to cool guys from in our area, talking to cool guys around the fire service in general, like yourself. And then at some point, I had a switch. I was like, wait, people that make grabs, I can bring them on and talk to them about their experience. Like, what'd you expect? What actually happened? And I remember I told you this offline. I remember saying like, wow, I thought I had like a revolutionary idea. Like, this is so great of me to be able to think of it. And then I remember going back to my podcast list and seeing the grabs, knowing that I had listened to the grabs podcast probably a year prior to this thing ever launching, and going, oh, it wasn't my idea. It was in the back of the brain, and all of a sudden it kind of manifested. So I appreciate you guys' efforts in the podcasting space. And I know it's not just you. I know you have there's 5 of you or more that are juggling those projects. But it adds a great value to the fire service. So you could talk about that for a while, but I don't want to hold you here forever. So I appreciate you on the podcasting side also. Now, to the final 2 questions. The ones that I like to ask, the ones that are important to me, or I said it earlier. I didn't have a whole lot of mentors growing up. I have a couple now, which are really, really cool. But I didn't really have them starting out. So I wanted you to. I think they're super important. I think the topic of mentorship is super important. You have mentioned a bunch of names already, but if you could just spot like a couple guys that you think had I say this all the time, that had a vested interest in your well-being and your path in the fire service. Guys that were like, if you were doing good or bad, if you were doing good, they're cheering you on, saying, yeah, keep that up. If you were doing bad, hey, Nick, get back on the right path. I'm going to try to guide you down the right path. Who are those guys for you? I'm interested.
Yeah, there is a ton. And it's kind of hard to know where to start. And I know I'm going to miss some people. So if I
Let
miss some
let
people, it's not.
Hold on. Let's do like Corley Moore's Mount Rushmore, because you named about 18 people when you were rattling off all the people. So
Yeah.
let's reel it back to. Oh, I'd hate to steal the route Mount Rushmore. We're gonna go like a three-headed Mount Rushmore. Give me 3 guys, because I know you could talk all day, and then those other 3, everybody else that's not in those top 3 is just gonna have to understand, like, hey, Nick loves you too, but we have to limit him because he could do this stuff all day. Give me a few guys that are at the
Yeah.
top of your top of your mountain. They podium like gold, silver, bronze.
I'm going to smuggle some more names in here. But
I'm
I
editing them
think
all
right
out.
now,
I'm
yeah,
picking.
right. I think right now, the people that have had the biggest and continue to have the biggest influence on me, Chief Brush has been somebody that I've looked up to since I first started reading his work back in, I don't know, back when he was with Fire Service Warrior back in 2009, whatever year that was. I've mentioned Rhino's name a ton, so I'm not going to include him in here, even though I just kind of did. There's a chief out in California that I have so much respect for. His name is Chief Eric Sailors, and he's somebody that if he writes something, I will make sure that I read it. So Chief Sailors, Chief Brush. I'm going to say Bill Carey right now as well. The last 2 articles that he has written have been, I think, 2 of the better things that I have read in the fire service. Just
Mention
end
him
of
real quick.
discussion.
Mention him real quick.
Uh, the newest articles that he's
Yeah,
written,
yeah. In case
or just
anybody's
Bill Carey.
no Bill Carey. We don't.
I'm
But
gonna,
they can Google Bill Carey, but like he was on. He does Data Not Drama, correct? That's his
yep,
thing.
yep. Him and Chief Dave LeBlanc do Data Not Drama. So that's data hyphen not hyphen drama.com, which is a great website, and we've used a lot of their data. Bill helped write the remove in, two in, two out, the remove in, two in, two out white paper that we wrote. I've got a chance to present with him at some point in time, and just what he really does, kind of granularly, is he looks at the data from fireground LODDs or just fire service LODDs, and actually has a little bit more knowledge on them and data on them. So that I think is super useful for the fire service. The last 2 articles that he has written, titles are escaping me right now,
No, it's okay.
but you can go on
General
data.
synopsis, sure.
Yeah, datanotdrama.com. And he's talking about risk, and he's talking about kind of psychologically what happens when we make mistakes. So there's kind of these 30,000 foot views where he's talking about risk and operations and mistakes that we make that I think is just very wise. And he's using this 30-year perspective that he has in the fire service and then looking really closely when it comes to risk at LODDs as well, and then civilian deaths. And so I just think those two articles that he's written have been something that has moved me and has moved my needle as far as those topics, what I think of these topics. And these are big topics. Like risk is a big nebulous term, and I think he does a good job of trying to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, so that when you're talking about risk, it's the same thing as when I'm talking about risk. So at least we have some type of unity in concept here.
I want to plug. I want to plug that also to say that I for the first few first few recruit classes that we talked about, I didn't include Bill's data. It wasn't. I didn't really find it until later. And when you talk about line of duty deaths, there is a chief that I absolutely love to death. I do consider him a mentor. He's one of the very, very few that I think are very close to me that's trying to guide me down the right path. But he's one of those old school guys, and he's one of those when I say talk about, let's say, VES or window oriented search or whatever. He said, "Hey, I'm not going knock on Mrs. Scott's. I'm not sending you in there and then going knock on Mrs. Scott's door to tell her that I sent you in on that search." And so he's got that old school mentality, but it was Bill's work that you go and he's breaking down these line of duty deaths to say, the 100 firemen per year, and really it's closer to 80, 85. It's kind of coming down a little bit. But then he goes, how many of them were interior? Well, now you're down to it's most of the time it's barely into the double digits, but most of the time it's single digits interior firefighting operation deaths. And the ones that are search, it's an even smaller number than that. So those kind of like when you frame it that way, it's like, well, how many fires are we making? How many residential structure fires are there in the United States? 1 point, ballpark, right? It goes up and down, 1.4 million. Well, if only three of those, like three deaths a year on search, what are your actual odds of dying? They're remarkably low. The risk, what our brain thinks risk is, like we think that going in through a window to search is this, and I would have said the exact same thing a decade ago. That's a high risk thing. And it wasn't until I had the data to go, no, we're dying from vehicle accidents, heart attack. COVID was tearing us up for a few years. Training ground exercises. It's like, it's not, it's not as search is not as risky as it was. And it was Bill that opened my eyes up to be able to say, wait, we got to reframe this. And DJ Stone talking about ranch houses, the building collapse in the corner of any ranch, the chances of roof collapse in that corner room is about zero. It's one of the safer spots you're ever going to be in is in that corner spot. So when you start to say, number one, it's reasonably low based on your training and experience, but also getting the data to say, where are we at in the structure? Then you start adding it up and it goes to your point. It's it's probably not as risky as we were talking, but it's hard to switch some of the older guys who I love to death, but that's a battle. But anyway, I didn't mean to take over this whole thing, but yes, thank you to Bill for digging through that data, because if he doesn't, I certainly wasn't ever going to dig through the data. So somebody did, and thankfully he did. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, well said. No, well said. I think those would be kind of my three-headed monsters for now. Taylor Quinnell at my department, Jeff Bryant as well, are other guys that I can't not name. But I also want to smuggle in just a couple more.
Go ahead.
Since I'm talking to you, and I know you're a fan of some of these guys. All these guys behind me, they have never met me. Or almost none of them have met me. But guys like Carl Sagan, God, Sam Harris, Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Of course, Neil, right?
Malcolm Gladwell. Like these are
Yeah.
some of my friends that they don't know that we're friends yet. But
Yeah.
I think some of those guys have changed my perspective on life and the job and being a husband and being a father. Probably more so than a lot of people that I meet day to day, which is kind of weird. But I'm having conversations with these guys in my head as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I went through we've talked about this offline. All of those guys are fantastic reads, and when you talk about Corley talks about books are books that the firemen should read. I think those are for life. I think those are not just firemen. I think for life, those particular authors are very, very good. And I own a lot of we talked about it. We own a lot of the similar books. I'm not as a prolific of a reader as you are. You got an impressive list back there. Uh, but yeah, you're right. I'm right. I'm literally right there with you. Um, all right. That was mentors. The next one is going to be advice that you would give a young Nick Ledin before he goes into the fire service. He's graduated the academy. He's fixing to walk into his first station assignment, and you grab a hold of him, and you want to give him a piece. So far, you know this already. You've had a pretty good career with all the stuff that you've been able to be involved in, the traveling with teaching, and you've had your finger on the pulse pretty early and pretty consistently. But what would you say to to maybe make it a little bit better?
So when I was coming in, like I just saw this as a job. They had a better pension. They had some more downtime. They got to work out more. They got to do some cooler stuff. And I didn't know this was going to be like a calling, for lack of a better word. I don't know if I have any like super sage advice other than just kind of follow your heart, follow your mind, and love what you do. There's this quote that's so used so often it's cliche, but if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I pretty much feel that way more often than not. Like there's days where I don't want to go to work and I'd rather hang out with my family. Obviously, I got a great family, but I got a pretty awesome job. They pay me enough, and I get to do some pretty cool stuff and get to go spread the message and spread the cure as well to other people, which is super cool and super rewarding as well. So just, I don't know, for me, it's just been, it seems very organic for me, but just, follow your heart, follow your mind, and figure out why you're doing this, and then just double down on the why. There's a great book by Simon Sinek, another person that I could have named, but start with why. You kind of alluded to that earlier as well when you're talking about having to explain to Molly why this is important and why Preston had to talk with the lioness about the importance of what he does. But figure out what your why is, and then once you have that established, like lean all the way into it, man. Figure out if this aligns with your why, and if it does, do it. And if you're going to do something, more often than not, like jump in with both feet.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff. I got lucky. I got lucky in the fire service because I started as a volunteer. So I felt like it was a calling pretty early on. Like I didn't come into it for the pay and benefits. I knew signing up that I said it multiple times, and calling, it's a weird word for me. But anyway, they I said anyway, I knew that it's like there's something's pulling me towards this thing that I know that I truly enjoy. So I'm gonna say again that I completely agree with you. Grab it and go. Grab it and go. I don't want to say be all in, but be all in.
Yeah.
Uh, Nick, there are 1,000 things that I would love to continue to talk to you about. I'd like to do a whole podcast. We talked about it. I'd like to do a whole podcast separately on just some of the books that you mentioned. Maybe I'll start up a science-based podcast that have nothing to do with firemen. I'll tell you what, if I ever do, you're going to be my very first guest. I promise we're going to do it. If I ever open up a non-firefighting podcast, I'm dragging you in for that very first episode. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate your kindness to me throughout anything I've ever texted you about, whether it was the Church of Search that I thought, once again, I thought I had created that on my own, and I didn't. I saw it on the internet. It just so happened to be you, and you were like, "Nah, man, take it and run with it." You've been very wonderful with your advice, with information, with encouragement, and I thank you for all that. And I also thank you for your time. I know that you're involved with 1,000 different things. You got kids at home right now, and and like I said, I appreciate you stopping in for now an hour and 40 some odd minutes to talk to me about fire stuff and sharing some of your passion. So we appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the invite, Chris. Anytime I get a chat with you, I consider it a win. So thank you, man. And also tell Molly thanks and that I said hi.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I'll if yeah, next time y'all talk, it's gonna be more work for her. Like, oh, we got to do the next 5,000's coming in. We gotta get those
Right?
numbers crunched. Hopefully now that she's done kind of the heavy lifting for the 4,000, hopefully when it comes to the 5,000, it's going to be a little bit easier of a move over. But anyway, that's Excel nerd stuff. I know nothing about that. I'll let her deal with it on her end. But anyway, Nick, I appreciate you. Please stay in touch. Nick, if somebody wants to reach out to you, if some loser from some other part of the, like myself, from some no name department wants to, once again, like myself, wants to talk to Nick Ledin and kind of bounce stuff off, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'll give you three different options here. These are kind of the three different ways to get a hold of me. The first one is probably on Facebook. It's Nick Ledin. That's Ledin. I don't even know what my profile picture is anymore, to be honest. But Nick Ledin on there. I'm from Wisconsin, so I'll be the Wisconsin firefighter named Nick. You can email me. That's nledin, Nledin, at hotmail.com. And that's how old I am. And then, or you can just give me a call. It's 719-494-9070.
There you go. So if you want to talk to Nick a little more about all the stuff he's involved in, NFPA, FSRI, UL, the Firefighter Rescue Survey, he's doing a lot of cool stuff. Podcasting, he's doing a lot of cool stuff. And like I said, from my experience, he's always been wonderful to talk to. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. That is going to conclude the next episode of the Dragons Den podcast. Nick, once again, I appreciate it. We'll catch you on the other side.
Thank you, brother.